it. Looking forward to see who else is here.
Great. Well, I'm monitoring the meeting and hosting, and Todd will be presenting today. And so I'll be kind of admitting people. I think Zoom came up with a new thing where you have to have a waiting room and admit people now. So I guess it helps. But anyway, we also are going to be recording this presentation, and we'll be able to send you the recording afterwards in an email. So if you do have any questions, or don't feel like you have to write everything down really quickly, you'll have access to that. But feel free to kind of write your questions as we go in case you have something that comes up. We will have some time for questions at the end. And then if for some reason we don't hit everything that you have questions about, you can always get in touch with us, email Todd or myself, because we want to keep the conversation going. So great. And I like seeing that people are utilizing the chat. Also, I love that there's someone here from Wichita, Kansas. I have family in Wellington for Chad there. Yes, I have family in Wellington, so you know exactly who I'm talking about. We used to fly into Wichita all the time, so great. So I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Whitney Owens. I am the owner of Water's Edge Counseling. We are a private practice for mental health located in Savannah, Georgia. So we do mental health counseling for all different types of issues. We have several therapists. There's 6 of us, so we try to cover the gamut so that you don't have to call multiple places to get your needs met. We don't necessarily advertise overtly that we're a Christian practice, but all of us are Christians by faith origin, and we incorporate our faith values into the work we do when clients are wanting that kind of perspective in their counseling. So we do really enjoy that type of work and working with other churches. So Todd here is one of the counselors at Water's Edge Counseling, who's also a pastor. I'm going to guess some of you probably personally know Todd, which is why you're here. But for those of you that don't, he also not only is a therapist, but he's a pastor at one of the Lutheran churches here in Savannah. And so he can kind of speak with some authority on some of these issues. So I'm going to go ahead and let him get started, but feel free as everyone's coming in, let's utilize the chat during the presentation, and feel free to continue to introduce yourself to everyone in the chat.
Okay, great. Well, again, welcome to all of you. I'm glad to be with you and to share this with you today. I've switched to screen share, and I'm hoping that it is working as it should, that you all can see the slides. It is not working as it should. How about now? Can somebody give me a...
Yes, yeah, you got it.
Okay, great. Great. Well, as Whitney said, I'm a pastor in Savannah at Lutheran Church of the Ascension. I've been ordained for almost 16 years, and I've served at churches in North Carolina and Ohio and now in Georgia. I was also briefly a chaplain at a Lutheran college in South Carolina. I was at that time licensed in South Carolina. I still hold a license in Ohio, and I'm working on my license as a counselor in Georgia. And when we get to the question answer portion, please know that Whitney will also be able to answer questions as well. So as we get ready to talk about caring for parishioners, I thought first it might be helpful to talk about some of the challenges. One of the challenges is that we are limited to an hour-long webinar, which means that we can't cover the gamut of issues. I'm also aware that context matters, particularly church size and church location. So what I'm experiencing in Savannah may be different than a church in a rural community or a large city, or even a church in sort of a different geographical location. There has been enough research done on church congregation size, rather, to know that that's going to have an impact on how you are expected to or even able to care for parishioners during this time. The size of the church affects how decisions are made and even the role that the pastor plays in those decisions. I think as well as clergy, we face this very interesting struggle in that we are often judged subjectively and evaluated subjectively. In other words, we aren't evaluated objectively. Did we carry out the tasks that we were assigned to? Instead, we're often judged based on how we make people feel. And so talking about techniques and possible reactions that people may have, I know full well that some people may respond well to some of the tips and techniques that I offer, and some people may not. And the other issue is that some of these challenges are tough, especially because the average pastor graduates seminary with the equivalent of a Psychology 101 class. Now, that's not something to be worried about. The average counselor graduates from their program with no preaching classes. So we all have our strengths. Nonetheless, I hope to give you some insights and tools, perhaps even some new ways to think about things that will help you as you continue to care for your church members during this time. So that said, let's talk first about 4 common issues that we've seen arise since COVID-19 started. And the first that I want to touch on is alcohol consumption. As of April the 2nd, when we compare alcohol sales for this time period to the same time period last year, in-store sales of mixed drinks and spirits are up 75%, of wine 66%, and of beer 42%. The shocking one is that online sales of alcohol are up 243% as compared with this time last year. And so what does this mean? It means that consumption is increasing, and this can lead to a number of issues. Most notably, when people begin using substances to self-medicate, they may be trying to numb what they're experiencing or even avoid feelings. A lot of times, those who are using alcohol or consuming a higher amount will say, well, when this is all over, I'll go back to drinking less. But the challenge is that people have now become accustomed to this norm. And as sheltering in place continues to stretch on for extended periods of time, we have things like heavier drinking becoming a habit. And once something becomes a habit, it's much harder to break. And so if someone shares with you that they are drinking more and are concerned about that, some good questions to ask them are, do you want to cut back? And have you tried to, but you've been unsuccessful in doing so? Is your drinking causing issues either socially or occupationally or within your family functioning? Do you have an increased tolerance? Does it take more for you to get buzzed or drunk? Are you engaging in seeking behaviors? In other words, do you find yourself thinking about when you'll be able to get your next drink and planning on how to do that? Are you binge drinking? Are you drinking excessive amounts in a short time span with the goal of getting drunk? And are you getting buzzed or drunk each time that you drink? The way people answer these questions may point to the need for some help with substance abuse. So what I would suggest for pastors is that we dig a bit deeper. And here are some ways that we can do so. If it comes up in conversation, another appropriate question to ask is, when you drink, what are you trying to avoid or get away from? And this question may actually identify deeper issues with depression or anxiety, or even show that there's a lack of coping mechanisms. One possible option and technique that you can use is working with people on breaking the cycle. So what you do is you have the person identify the time or the times of day that they drink and the events and the stressors that lead them to desire that drink. And so, for example, if someone says that every Tuesday at 3 p.m. they have a 2-hour meeting on Zoom, and afterwards they immediately fix a drink, what we're going to do is have them break the cycle at that point. When the meeting is over, instead of fixing a drink, have them do something that they enjoy or find relaxing. Maybe the meeting ends and they take a walk around the neighborhood, or they call a friend, or they go outside and do some yard work. And the hope is that by breaking the cycle in the places where it's happening around the same time of day with the same events or the same stressors, is that they'll see that they don't actually need the alcohol as a coping mechanism. Another technique, and it's one that you're going to hear me say over and over again in this presentation. In fact, if I had to shrink it down to 1 3-word phrase, it would be name it, pastor. When you preach, when you teach, when you write newsletter articles, name that you know that this is a real legitimate issue. Doing so tells people that you're aware, and it may give them the courage to talk to you. I think another piece of the puzzle for us is to be aware of what our particular denomination or faith tradition says about alcohol use. Depending on the answer, some in your congregation may be feeling additional shame when they drink, as though they are not only going against the teaching of the church, but that they're also letting God down in some way. And that can be good fodder for conversation if someone does tell you that their alcohol consumption has increased. Besides alcohol, another trend that we're seeing is that domestic violence is increasing. And this appears to be a worldwide problem. It seems to be happening in all nations. COVID-19 has brought on increased stressors, financial, job stressors, illnesses. It's also brought on decreased outlets. We're not able to spend time with family and friends. We can't take a break from home. We can't go to the gym, those types of things. And it's also introduced a very interesting challenge with the shelter in place. Police officers are sharing that when they go to a home and respond to a domestic violence incident, that there are people who can't leave the house, that they have nowhere else to go. And so what happens when we're all supposed to shelter in place and someone is unable to leave or doesn't have any place to go? It's important for us to know that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will experience violence from an intimate partner at some point in their life, and that 1 in 6 homicide victims are killed by their intimate partner. In Savannah, one of the interesting things is that domestic violence is a root cause of homelessness. And I wonder if that's the case where you are too. What we're seeing here is that women will flee a home where they're being abused, but then they won't go to a shelter because they're afraid they're unsafe and they end up living in their car. Men often end up homeless because they've been asked or forced to leave the home and they end up on the streets. The challenge, I think, with domestic violence is that it's a topic that people might be hesitant to discuss with us. There is a great feeling of shame around domestic abuse. We even see some people who are suffering from abuse who begin to believe that it's somehow their fault, that they take on the blame for what is happening to them. So how then, as pastors, do we help people who are trapped in their home because they have fewer choices available to them? Well, one of the things I think a good rule of thumb for us is if you have concerns about a particular couple or a family unit, and if you've been in the habit of calling and checking on the members of your congregation, make sure for those couples that you're concerned about that you check in individually with each spouse so that you hear from both of them that things are okay, or from one of them that things are not okay. I would also commend to you the National Domestic Violence Hotline. It has a ton of resources for those who are experiencing domestic abuse, but it also has resources for those who are fearful that they show abusive behaviors. And it even has resources for family and friends who are concerned. And again, we're back to that concept of naming it. So one thing you can do as you communicate with your congregation is to use a very generalized approach. You can mention that media outlets are reporting there's an increase in domestic violence. You can say something like, if you're at all concerned about a friend or a family member, reach out to the hotline, and you can share the website information. This puts it in people's hands. They see you naming it honestly as a potential issue, and it might open doors for people to come and talk to you. And also, again, in sermons, naming it in a church service, however you're presenting those, it makes it more real to people. This might also be a good time for us as clergy to think about discretionary funds if we have those available through our churches. Can we provide safe shelter for an individual or a family in a hotel so that we can get them or help them get out of an abusive environment? Do we even know what the local shelters are doing in terms of taking new clients? Some of the shelters here are not letting anyone new in. How are these shelters being funded during this time? Are they receiving the items that they need? So one of our responses can be, as clergy and as a congregation, to reach out to some of these shelters to see how we might support them in the work that they're doing. Another disturbing trend that we're seeing is that while we have increased reports of domestic abuse, we have decreasing reports of child abuse. And that's because a majority of those who report child abuse and neglect are teachers or other school staff, and they don't have access to children at this time. Along with domestic abuse and issues for adults, COVID-19 has increased stressors and reduced outlets for our children. After school care, time with friends, extracurriculars, all of that has been taken away from them. And because of this increased stress in their lives, they may become more argumentative and less focused. What we know is that even for families that seem to have good parenting skills and strong relationships with their kids, there's a chance that the stressors the child is experiencing and them being more argumentative and the stressors the adults are experiencing can lead to angry or abusive behavior. And one of the ways that we see parents sort of breaking down a little bit right now is simply because they're asked to take on new roles. They're asked to be teachers, and often the concepts that they're asked to teach are being taught very differently than the way they were when we as parents were in school. So with these increased stressors, with child abuse reports decreasing, but we know are still happening, what might we be able to do? And again, as clergy, it presents a challenge for us because we have less access to children and youth during this time. So if you're able, or if someone on your staff is able to check in with children and youth in an appropriate way, I would encourage you to add that to the things that you're doing, especially with younger children. If you have a chance to talk to them, don't ask them questions like, are you feeling sad? Children don't always have the strongest descriptors of how they are feeling and will sometimes mimic the words that we say to them. So for instance, if you ask a 6-year-old, are you crying because you're sad? They may indeed say, yes, I'm sad, when they've never thought of putting an emotion word around what they're feeling. So I like to use I wonder questions with kids to say something like this. Well, I wonder how you felt when that happened. And suppose the child says back, well, my stomach hurt. Well, I wonder what was going on that your stomach hurt. Well, I was afraid that if I messed up on my schoolwork, mom would get mad. Oh, so when you're afraid, sometimes your stomach hurts. Well, I wonder what happens when mom gets mad. And that invites them in to the conversation and lets them talk about what they're feeling instead of us putting those descriptors on them. If we're not able to have those conversations, we need to pay attention to warning signs when we are able to be back together. If a child is wearing long sleeve shirts and long pants or coats, even when it's warm and they refuse to take those off or to roll up their sleeves, they may be trying to hide bruises or welts. This is also, by the way, something to watch out for with children and youth who are engaging in self-harm behaviors. They will often try to cover some of the cutting that they may be doing. If a child has typically been engaged and suddenly seems withdrawn or hypervigilant as though they're always watching for danger, this can be a clue for us that something's going on. If we see a significant change in their personality or their behaviors, or if we see unexplained bruises, welts, cuts, those types of things, those can be warning signs of abuse. We also need to research our state laws. Currently, only 28 states list clergy as mandated reporters. In other words, those who have to call if they suspect abuse or neglect in a child, someone who is disabled or incompetent, or an elderly person. I encourage you, even if your state doesn't require you to be a mandated reporter, to understand yourself as a mandated reporter. Reporting is anonymous, and this is one of the best ways that we can care for children. When it comes to domestic violence and child abuse, there are some possible techniques that you can share with families, particularly to help with the stressors. And what you can do is you can encourage them to develop a schedule. For children, that schedule needs to mimic their school schedule. If they have math every morning at 9 a.m. at school, have math every morning at 9 a.m. at your house. Make sure you build in recess and time for breaks as well. Something else you can teach your families is what it comes by many different names. I remember it as the 4x4 breathing exercise. And what you do is you encourage people to breathe in deeply for 4 counts, to then hold that breath for 4 counts, to breathe out for 4 counts, and then again to hold for 4 counts. Deep breathing helps calm us. It's something that when we're feeling stressed or anxious or angry or upset can kind of give us a pause to calm down a bit. Encourage families that as a family unit and as individuals to list ways that they're able to reduce stress. And again, both as individuals and as a family. Maybe it's a 30-minute walk. Maybe everybody takes quiet time in shifts or all at the same time. Maybe people are going to find a new hobby to take up. For families with older kids, I've even encouraged some to schedule house to myself time. Everyone leaves the house while one person gets the house to themselves. Of course, that one you need to use carefully and make sure that when people have the house to themselves that they are also staying safe. One of my favorites is to teach people fact versus value statements. A fact versus value statement. A fact statement is what it sounds like. It states a fact. A value statement is something that someone either says about who we are or that we interpret about who we are. So here's an example of a fact versus value statement that goes off the rails. A spouse or a partner comes home and looks at their partner and says, "You didn't unload the dishwasher." Well, that's a fact statement. You didn't unload the dishwasher. But the person who heard it often hears it as a value statement. They hear, "You think I'm a terrible housekeeper." People get defensive and the arguments begin. What we encourage people to do is remember the fact statement. You didn't unload the dishwasher is true. The other person didn't say you're a terrible housekeeper. And so how can we help people differentiate between fact versus value statements? Well, we can encourage them to actually use that language to say, this is a fact statement. I noticed that the laundry has not been put away. And then the person hears this is a fact statement and maybe can filter out some of the ways that they take it personally. We can also encourage people to stick with value statements that build one another up. I love it when you do this. You show so much grace when you do that. So it's a good technique to use. Of course, when things get stressful, you can also take a break. There's nothing wrong with stepping into a bedroom, closing the door, doing a slow count to 10, just momentarily removing yourself from the stressful situation. And a great thing to do too is encourage people to scream into a pillow. You're not going to hurt the pillow. It's going to get some of the stress out. I can't tell you how many times I've wished that I had a pillow in my office at the church. So please use some of these techniques to help reduce stress for folks. There is another interesting trend that we're seeing at this time, and it's that calls to divorce lawyers are increasing. One of my colleagues at Water's Edge, Cami Goods, mentioned that she recently read an article that said couples are trending in one or two directions during this time. Either they're strengthening their bonds or they're moving actively toward divorce. And I think I share that with you, I share that with you just so that we all know that we may have to be doing a little more work with couples as we come out of shelter in place. So what does all of this mean? What does the increased alcohol use, the higher rates of domestic violence, the lower rates of reported child abuse, the increased calls to divorce lawyers? Well, I think what it means, using an earthquake reference, is that we are discovering fault lines, that there are issues that have perhaps been overlooked by the family, issues that are under the surface, issues that have been avoided because people have more time apart and they have typical work schedules. And so I believe the challenge for us is going to be creating space for people to talk about these fault lines. It's going to be very unsettling at times for people to do so. And why will it be unsettling? Because things like our spouse and our children are close to our identity. And when something is close to our identity, it's harder to talk about. It's more painful to discuss. There are stronger emotions associated with it, and it requires more serious and significant introspection and work. And most of us don't like to do this introspection. It's unsettling to look at painful and powerful emotions. So as clergy, how can we create that space? Well, again, name it, Pastor. Honestly name that you know these things are happening. Name that as unsettling as it can be, people do not have to experience it alone. I think it's also helpful for us to know our own biases. Is this a topic that I can discuss with a church member, or do I have some particular bias around it? Would I be too judgmental or even too emotional? We need to be aware of countertransference, projecting our own emotions onto the church member. And so, for example, if I experienced domestic abuse in a relationship and I'm still processing it, I may not be able to hear very well from someone who is also experiencing it. I might begin to share my emotions or experiences and kind of muddy the water in the conversations that I'm having with that person. If you haven't already, please develop a strong list of referrals. Who are the local psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and mental health counselors in your neighborhoods? Which ones specialize in certain disorders or even specialize in certain age groups? And please do refer. A good rule of thumb for us as clergy is that if we can't help someone resolve an issue in 4 one-hour meetings, we need to refer. Referral doesn't mean failure. It doesn't mean that you failed your church member. In fact, if they're okay with it, have them sign a release allowing their counselor to speak with you. You can partner with that person and create a continuum of care. You can support and encourage the work that's being done in therapy while also continuing to offer spiritual guidance and pastoral care. I think it's a good idea for us as clergy to purge phrases like "I understand" from our vocabulary. Even if we've experienced almost the exact same thing, everyone processes the events in their lives differently. And so we might not always understand how they're experiencing it. So I like to use this phrase, help me understand. Help me understand what you are feeling. Help me understand what hurts the most. Those types of statements invite people to try and express more fully what they are experiencing. And building on the challenge of I understand statements, we also need to be appropriately cautious with self-revelation. Yes, it's good to say things like, I too have experienced something similar, but we need to make sure it doesn't take the conversation off the rails where all of a sudden you and the person you're meeting with are talking about you. As people tell their story, listen for emotions, share those back so that the person in question knows that they are being heard. And frankly, these are good steps to follow as you speak with your church members about all issues, and especially about anxiety and depression. And the next topic I'd like to touch on is depression. First, if a church member has ever disclosed to you that they struggle with anxiety or depression, when you check in with them during this time, say it out loud. I remember you told me that you struggle with depression. How are you? Are you feeling depressed? And here are some things to listen for in terms of issues with depression. Um, are they feeling hopeless or sad most of the day for 2 weeks? Sometimes the hopelessness and sadness doesn't come out in kids. Sometimes what kids experience is irritability. Sometimes men experience anger. You can ask them if they're no longer interested in activities that they previously enjoyed. You can inquire if they've had any significant weight gain or loss, more than 5% that's not due to another reason like diet or exercise, like trying to lose weight. You can inquire about their sleep patterns. Are they sleeping too much? Are they sleeping too little? Are they not sleeping at all? Is their sleep restless? We also can look out for movement changes. Are their movements more agitated or slower, so much so that people notice this? Do they feel like they have a lack of energy? Are they experiencing feelings of worthlessness or excessive guilt? Are they having trouble concentrating or making decisions? And are they having recurrent thoughts of death or suicidal ideation? All of these are markers of depression and are things to look out for if a church member shares that they're feeling sad or down. When it comes to suicide ideation, there are some things that we do need to look at. We need to first look at the risk. And a good way to remember the risk is sad personas. First of all, sex matters. Males are more likely than females to commit suicide. Females are more likely to attempt suicide. Age matters. Adolescents and the elderly are at a higher risk for suicide attempts. Depression. Those with depressed symptoms or with a history of depression are more likely to commit suicide. And previous attempts are a good marker as well. One of the highest risk factors, in fact, for suicide. The more attempts a person has made means the more likely they are to attempt again. When you assess for suicide, also assess ethanol use. Ask if alcohol is at home. Inquire about the amount that they're drinking and the days that they're drinking. For anyone who is depressed, we discourage alcohol use. We need to look for any loss in rational thinking. Have they increased their impulsivity, or are they thinking irrationally? Also, a lack in forward thinking matters. Forward thinking is being able to talk about what you're going to do later this week or over the weekend. So ask them if they have plans for the weekend or for the rest of the day. A lack of a support system can be a risk factor in those who might be attempting suicide. So a healthy support system decreases the likelihood of an attempt. And an organized plan, ask what their plan is, if they're thinking about suicide. Determine if the plan could be completed or if the plan could lead to death. Those without a spouse are at a higher risk. Those who have lethal means, the availability of lethal means in their homes means that they have access to carry out their plan. Always ask about guns in the house. Guns are the #1 method used for committing suicide. So if someone is suicidal, we need to make sure that guns are secured, that they're locked and safe, and that person doesn't have access to the key or the bullets are locked elsewhere. If the guns aren't secure, have family members remove the guns, and we need to eliminate all other lethal means. For example, locking up medications, taking the person's car keys, getting rid of alcohol, those types of things. And one of the other risk factors is sickness. Long-term health concerns and terminal illnesses are also a risk factor. So if you feel like you need to assess suicidality, ask the person if there are suicidal thoughts. We need to identify if those thoughts are passive or active. Passive suicidal thoughts are things like, maybe I'll die on the way to work today, or the world would be better if I weren't here. Active suicidal thoughts are the ones where they are planning how to carry it out. So if they are active, determine their intent. What are the chances that they will act on it? Identify their plan and identify the means that they have to carry out the plan. We also need to be a part of their support network, but also In these cases, we might need to reach out to their support network, letting that person and the people who are around them know about local emergency rooms, local mental health hospitals, and even reminding people that if they get too frightened to call 911. And by all means, you can follow up with your church members as well. And a great way to do so is to set a time to say, okay, I'm going to call you at 3 p.m. today. I'm going to call you at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning and check in with you. If you cannot get a hold of them, leave a detailed message. We said that we would talk at 10 this morning. I can't get a hold of you. I am going to call back in 10 minutes, 15 minutes. If you don't answer, I'm going to call the police and ask them to come by your house and do a wellness check. We can certainly encourage people, or we can certainly take advantage of wellness checks if we are worried about a person potentially committing suicide. Being isolated can magnify feelings of depression, as can life events, job changes, issues with family, etc. So some techniques that we might share with folks who are feeling depressed or isolated is that 4x4 breathing method. Encourage those who are depressed to practice this, to calm and settle themselves through deep breathing. Encourage them to practice it if they're having trouble sleeping at night. Sometimes that deep breathing can help people relax and slip into a deeper sleep. Exercise and movement is important for dealing with depression as well. And you can remind people they can start with small incremental steps. So sometimes a person is so depressed, they say, I can't even imagine leaving my house. All right, so we're going to start with exercise and movement in this way. Today, you're going to walk from your front door to your mailbox and back to your front door. That's it. But tomorrow, you're going to walk to your mailbox and then to your neighbor's driveway and back. And so you have them slowly build on how much they can do and celebrate those successes. I didn't think I could leave the house. Look at that. I was able to leave the house and walk this far. You can also have them reframe negative self-talk. I'm going to go into a little more detail on that in just a moment. You can encourage journaling. If they don't like to write, but they like other formats of expressing their emotions, like music or artwork, have them compose a song about how they're feeling. Have them paint their emotions. It'll help them process in a medium that feels good to them. And you can encourage them to start and end each day with the 2 things exercise. And it's as simple as this. When you wake up in the morning and as you're preparing to go to bed at night, you name 2 things that you like about yourself. You name 2 things that made you smile. You name 2 things that you're looking forward to, or 2 things that you enjoyed, or 2 things that went well, making them begin to shift people toward this idea of focusing on some of the things that feel good in the midst of feeling down. One of my favorites to use is from a book called Feeling Good by Dr. David Burns. In it, he includes a mood log. And the way that this works is you identify the upsetting event, you list the negative thoughts, you identify the distortions, and you reframe them. So I made this in line with what some of us might be experiencing right now. Upsetting event. Parishioner told me they hated the online worship service. And you can see some of the negative thoughts that might arise in our minds at that point. The table at the bottom are the cognitive distortions. And you can see the descriptions of each of those. Remember, we're going to send you these slides afterwards so that you have access to this. But these are our common cognitive distortions. And so once we list our negative thoughts, we need to then identify what's the distortion. Are we fortune telling? Are we labeling or mislabeling an event? Are we using should statements which result in guilt? And once we identify the cognitive distortion, then we reframe our negative thought in a positive way. Somebody's upset, it doesn't mean I'm failing at my job. In fact, I've continued to provide new ways to reach out to people. It's been hard, but I'm learning a new skill set, and that takes time, and I'm doing the best I can. Those types of things are ways that you can reframe those negative thoughts. In addition to depression, we're also seeing the possibility of increased anxiety during this time. For people who already struggle with anxiety, they may be even more anxious. And that's in part due to those increased number of stressors. When you have some time, if you haven't before, I encourage you to find the Holmes Rahe Life Stress Inventory. It puts a numerical value to how stressful certain events are. And if you were to look over it right now, you would see a number of the events on that inventory are things that people are experiencing right now. Just in the past 6 to 8 weeks, there have been job changes, there have been financial challenges, there have been changes to our ability to get together with family and friends. There have been changes in working conditions. All of these are on that scale. I think it's also helpful to remember that anxiety is not a bad emotion. Anxiety motivates us. It's what motivates us to study for exams, to prepare for presentations, even to make sure that the sermon is written before the church service starts. It's when anxiety gets too high or too low that we worry. How can anxiety get too low? Well, when you become so non-anxious that you just don't care about anything, your anxiety is too low. When it gets too high, it can be crippling. So some of the signs of anxiety to look out for are excessive worry that's difficult to control, feeling keyed up or on edge, having a rapid heart rate or trouble breathing, other physiological symptoms like unexplained sweating or chills, feeling dizzy or lightheaded, unexplained trembling, difficulty relaxing and sleeping, and difficulty concentrating. And you'll notice that on this list, there are some similarities with the list of signs of depression. Unfortunately, depression and anxiety often walk hand in hand. And so when you're working with those who are anxious, you might find some similar approaches and techniques useful, using the Burns mood log, journaling, or the breathing exercises. Exercise combats anxiety. When we're anxious, we carry tension in our body in different places. There are increased amounts of adrenaline flowing through us because we are always on the lookout for something to happen, and that adrenaline keeps us keyed up and on edge. And we also feel more frustration. The challenge with frustration is that we can begin to spin into this place that we become overly frustrated, and that can lead to a panic attack. Exercise relieves tension and frustration. It also helps our body more quickly process adrenaline and gets rid of it. And so a reduction in the tension and the frustration and the adrenaline can help us feel less anxious. If you know someone who has panic attacks, the best thing you can encourage them to do is to ride the wave, not to try to cut the panic attack short. In other words, they experience the full panic attack, and they are kind of like a wave. They crest and then they hit the shore and everything kind of smooths out. You can encourage them while they're having the panic attack to kind of repeat to themselves things like, I know what's happening. This is a panic attack. I know I will be okay. I know that my heart is beating faster and I'm not having a heart attack. I know I can just ride the wave. I know that I will be fine. Those types of things will help people who are having panic attacks. For those who are anxious, you can also encourage object focus. You have them choose something small, a photograph, a memento, something that reminds them of a particularly good and joyful and relaxing time in their life. And then when they get anxious, they take a quick break, they focus on that object, and they remember those good, relaxing times that they enjoyed. Object focus, interestingly enough, is something I found to be particularly helpful for children and youth who have test anxiety, because they can set that object on their desk and take a moment to look at it when they are taking those tests. So when we get back into school, remember object focus for children and youth. Another great technique is grounding. Grounding is a way when we feel anxious, particularly if we feel like we're kind of floating outside of ourselves, to bring ourselves back into reality. And grounding works in this way. When we begin to feel anxious, we stop and we identify 5 things we can see, 4 things we can touch, 3 things we can hear, 2 things we can smell, and 1 thing we can taste. I often combine this with fixing a glass of water or another beverage because it makes me move into the kitchen, and then I get to say, okay, I can see the cup, I can see the can of soda, I can see the refrigerator, I can touch the cup, I can touch the coffee pot, those types of things. And then the thing that you get to that you can taste is the drink. With anxiety, I do want to go back to that idea that we talked about with alcohol use of breaking the cycle. Find out what sets off the person's anxiety. Is there a time of day or events that they feel more anxious about? And then we try to break that cycle for just a moment, taking them out of the anxiety and focusing on something new. So I know I feel most anxious after a meeting. So I'm going to immediately put on my running shoes and go running when that's done. That just kind of breaks that cycle for them. I'm going to come back to my main bullet point in all of this. Name it, Pastor. As clergy, it's vital for us to name that we know these things are real. Try as we might, we compete with other voices out there that tell us and our church members things like, if you only had true or the right amount of faith, God would heal you, or you need to pray more or pray better, or mental health counselors are suspect and can't be trusted. Now, the fact that you're all here pretty much convinces me that you don't think these things are true, but our parishioners do internalize these messages that appear on everything from Facebook posts to memes to something that someone's grandma stitched on a throw pillow. So what you can do is, this is a place where you can say, I care about you. I want you to get the best help that you can. I know mental health professionals are gifted by God to help people work through issues. I know of a great counselor. Let me give you their information and then follow up with them. What I've touched on are some good practices and possible techniques and some of the mental health issues we've encountered. I quickly want to take a look at missed milestones. Missed milestones result in grief. People experience grief when they are unable to do things that are important to them. So we've had church events rescheduled, things like weddings. And while it may seem like shifting a date on the calendar to us, it's stressful for those who've had to reschedule. And that stress is amplified when we think about mailing out new information, money that's been lost on deposits or honeymoons, people who didn't want to live together before marriage and canceled a lease thinking they could move at the end of the month and no longer can. And even disappointment over the date itself. People choose dates because they have particular meaning. And then there's concern still. Can grandma still come to the wedding if COVID-19 is still out there? Outside of weddings, there are members of our congregation who are missing important milestones like athletic banquets, proms, graduations. Even AP exams have been reduced to 45-minute online tests. So what can we do with missed milestones? Well, here's the challenge. We often swing into Bob the Builder mode. Remember Bob the Builder? He always said, can we fix it? Yes, we can. And here's an example of a way we swing into Bob the Builder mode. And I'm not trying to call anybody out, but a couple of weeks ago, it was very popular for adults to post their high school graduation picture on Facebook in honor of the 2020 graduates. Now, for adults, it was fun. Graduates, first, most of them never saw it because they don't use Facebook. And second, if they do and they saw it, it was a constant reminder to them that we got graduation and they didn't. So what do we do with missed milestones? Surprise, surprise, we name it. We name that we know they're happening. We don't try to tell them how it feels. Instead, we encourage them to tell us how it feels. We need to avoid planning events for them without their input. And if there's anything I would recommend in terms of missed milestones, it would be in terms of closure. Graduation is an ending. It's a chance to say goodbye to a school, to people you know, and then to move on to another chapter of your life. So saying things like goodbyes are important, and I hope you'll find a way to say goodbye to your classmates might be helpful. If they share their disappointment, even correct those silly things others have said to them. For example, if somebody has said, oh, it doesn't matter what day you get married, it just matters that you are getting married. Say, no, I know that mattered to you. Correct that and say what these other people are saying isn't important. You can even ask them if they want to name that in their ceremony in some way. Do they want to include a prayer that lifts up that they are sad over the changes in the date or the location? And we also need to be prepared for a new round of emotions next year. These kind of painful feelings may come back up as people see their friends getting the graduations, the proms, the wedding dates that they wanted. Now, missed milestones are one thing. Grief over a death is another. With grief as clergy, I think we need to start with some self-examination. I would wager that we all agree on the ministry of presence. We take seriously being able to be physically with people in their need, to sit with them, to pray with them, to listen as they process what is happening. But if we can't be physically present with them, for whom does it decrease the experience? Does it decrease it the most for them or for us? And I think that we have to deal with our own desires and some of the self-imposed guilt. Even those should statements that weigh us down. I should have been there. I should have gone to the hospital. Remember the Burns mood log. Shoulds are cognitive distortions and are laden with guilt. So when we get past our own stuff, we can be present by using whatever means of technology we have to connect. We can understand that we may have to be a bit more hands-on, that we might need to check in a bit more than usual. We can work with the person to determine what they would like. Do they want the smaller funeral now? Do they want to wait? Do they want to use technology like Zoom for the funeral? We also need to be aware that the typical schedule shifts. Usually grieving grows more profound after month 6 because the first 6 months are tied up with what I call the business of death, changing bank accounts and getting death certificates and those types of things. Now, though, people are going to be stuck at home. They're going to be surrounded by memories or the constant reminder of death, and that grieving may be happening a bit differently. So one of the things that we can do is normalize their choices, telling them that it's okay to have a funeral now or to wait. We can also be aware that typical support systems might be lost, whereas people would normally drop off casseroles or make phone calls. Those things may not be happening right now. And people may be moving on more quickly to their own issues and forgetting to check in with friends. And it helps us to remember that our presence is good even when it's over the phone. It's just as important to them. And in some ways, our care gets to become more creative during this time. Now, as clergy, we're accustomed to caring for others. This is also a time we should care for ourselves. Be honest with you, if one more person tells me to take care of myself during this time, I'm going to lose my ever-living mind. But I'm not telling you to take care of yourself, but I'm looking forward to concerns I see as we prepare to head back into the time when churches can worship together. First, we're going to have some feelings of tenderness. We've poured time and energy into finding new ways to function as church leaders. And what if people suggest it's not enough, or it didn't meet their needs, or they didn't like it? Well, we can try to remember this mantra. It's not about me, it's about them. So if somebody hits us with those misdirected emotions, we might say, oh, well, what was most upsetting? And then hopefully that will lead them into talking about their grief over being a part of missing church, and help them to see that they're misdirecting their emotions. However, sometimes people are just rude and they say nasty things to us with no emotion behind it other than they're just kind of being jerks. The best question I think we can ask, and this was actually given to me by someone in computer engineering, is, what would you like me to do with this information? Often that question disarms people and catches them off guard, and it forces them to tell you, if they will tell you, what they want you to do with the statement they've just made. As we get ready to open churches, don't reinvent the wheel. Talk to other colleagues. What steps are they taking? And remember, you're doing your best. None of us took a pandemic class in seminary. I think the challenge to being online makes it seem like we are now available 24/7 because people can check in to the online stuff 24/7. So we'll need to repeat our boundaries. I'm not available 24/7. It may take 24 to 48 hours for me to respond to an email. I'm going to honor my day off. And remember, when we establish boundaries, people will push back against them so we need to stay firm. We're also really good at giving grace to others and talking about grace, but not always good at giving grace to ourselves. So remember, we've done our best. You've been faithful. You've done what you can. And just sit in that grace for a moment. And finally, don't let comparison be the thief of joy. There's always going to be some church out there that did it better or did it more polished or was more technologically wow-tastic, but that doesn't reduce the work that we've done. And so for us, we can also remember the opportunity for counseling and self-care. This time, I'm going to open it up to questions, and I'm going to stop the share so that I can see your faces again. So what questions do you have? Absolutely none.
Oh, Todd, you know I have a question.
Okay.
Do you ever think that it's helpful, appropriate, both if you're trying to move a parishioner, encourage them to get professional counseling, to give any indication that you also engage in professional counseling? Sometimes I'll find what I usually say is, I think professional counseling is something we can all take advantage of. And I just wonder about that. Is that too much disclosure to say, and when I get to a hard place, I have to, turn to somebody else?
I think that it's very appropriate to share that because what it does is it normalizes the experience. Often people, when they're making that step toward counseling, think they're alone. I'm the only person feeling this. I'm the only one going through it. And so a good thing to check for when you say that is to be ready to deflect, like to say, I've been in counseling myself, or I am in counseling. I think it's a great thing to do. And the person goes, oh, what are you in counseling for? And you say, I'd really rather not talk about that at this point. But again, I want to repeat that I think it's very helpful and very useful. So that's, I think, yes, that'd be good to share.
Thanks.
Other questions? Okay.
Yeah, I just dropped here in the chat, would y'all be interested? It seems like this was a topic that was pretty relevant for you guys. If y'all would be interested as ministers, like if we did a monthly Q&A or monthly topics related to the church and mental illness and mental health, if that's something that y'all would be interested in, because it could be something kind of like this, just to kind of give you guys extra support while you're navigating this time and even beyond this time. Y'all can just jump in, just write in the chat. Yeah, that's something I'd be interested in. And obviously it's something we can kind of share with other pastors because I think y'all need more support than what you get. We all do really, but yeah.
I'm going to swing back to screen share here for a moment, just to share a bit more information with you. And I'm actually going to let Whitney talk a bit more about this. First, I want to thank you all for taking time out of your schedule to do this. And I want to echo again that you're doing good work. But I also wanted to share some of the contact information for Water's Edge. I'd lift up our Facebook page because we push out just general mental health tips there. But Whitney can tell you a bit more about the center and some of the things that we're able to offer.
Yeah, so we offer individual and couples counseling and family counseling if that's a need of yours. Right now, with what's going on in the pandemic, we all went and got certified in telehealth, so we can all do this in the state of Georgia. We don't have any licenses outside our state, so if you're outside the state, we can't necessarily do counseling for you, but we definitely want to be a resource if you're needing us. You can get in touch with myself or Todd by using our first names at watersedgecounseling.com, and you can send us an email. And if you are needing resources for therapists like in your area, more than likely we know someone that lives in your area that we can refer you to that we think would be a good fit. I think it's really important as a church that you find a couple of different therapists that you feel like you can have a really close relationship with, that you could talk freely amongst one another to be able to do referrals. But yeah, we're here to be a resource for you. And so we'll be taking this webinar and sending it to you through an email, and then we'll add you to our email list specifically for people who are pastors or work in the church, so you can get more information specifically for your needs. And I think we're going to start putting together a monthly meeting, and we'll try to probably do it at the same time. Todd and I'll get together about that so that we can offer this on a regular basis.
Okay. I'm also
Yeah.
willing, you know, to fly out to, say, Seattle to do a presentation at your church, Julie. Well, certainly, again, thank you all for being a part of this. And please do reach out if you have any other questions, and blessings to you as you continue your work.
All right. Thanks, Todd.
All right. Yep. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.